The glass left his hand before his mind caught up to the fury. It arced through the humid Atlanta evening, catching the gold light from the ballroom windows, and shattered cold across Amara Chen's face in front of 300 guests. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just stood there, water dripping from her lashes onto an ivory silk gown that cost more than their old apartment, looking at him with something he had never seen during their marriage. "Biddy, you shouldn't have come here, Marcus," she said, so quietly only he could hear it over the orchestra's awkward recovery. He didn't know the man on her arm was the reason he'd flown to Atlanta. He didn't know he was supposed to shake that man's hand in 40 minutes and sign a $10 billion deal. He was about to lose everything and find out all of it at once. If you're watching from your living room tonight, drop your city in the comments. And if stories about pride, regret, and public reckoning keep you hooked, smash subscribe, because what happens next in that ballroom will change how you see every person in this room. Because the man walking toward them now, moving through the crowd with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in his life needed to hurry, was not a stranger to the deal Marcus had spent 18 months chasing. He was the deal. His name was Jae-won, and depending on which financial paper you read, he was either the most private billionaire in Asia or the most dangerous one, a man who had turned a struggling shipping conglomerate into an empire spanning 4 continents by never, not once, losing a negotiation. Marcus had studied his face in briefing documents for a year. He had memorized his handshake preferences, his aversion to small talk, the specific brand of tea he liked served at 4 p.m. sharp. He had never once considered that the woman on his arm might be someone Marcus already knew. "Is there a problem here?" Jae-won's voice was calm. Calm. The kind of calm that made seasoned executives sweat through their shirts in boardrooms from Seoul to Singapore. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, and that was when Amara reached up slowly, deliberately, and wiped a bead of water from her collarbone, and said the 4 words that turned Marcus Webb's entire evening and his entire career to ash. "Jae-won, this is Marcus. My ex-husband." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Marcus felt it settle over his shoulders like wet concrete. Somewhere behind him, a photographer's shutter clicked once, twice, and he understood with sick clarity that this moment, this exact humiliating moment, was already being captured for someone's society page tomorrow morning. But it was Jae-won's reaction that Marcus hadn't prepared for. He didn't tense. He didn't scowl. Instead, something flickered behind his dark eyes that looked almost like recognition. Like he had been waiting a very long time to meet this particular man. "Marcus Webb," Jae-won said, and it wasn't a question. "From Webb Infrastructure Group." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. "How do you?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Webb." Jae-won's tone hadn't changed, but something underneath it had sharpened, like a blade being drawn slowly from a sheath. "We have a meeting in 40 minutes. Did you know that when you scheduled it?" Marcus's mouth went dry. He looked at Amara, really looked at her, for the first time in 4 years, and saw something he had missed entirely from across the room. She wasn't just accompanying Jae-won on tonight. The way she stood, the way 3 separate members of his security detail angled their bodies slightly toward her whenever she moved, the way the hotel's events coordinator had checked with her. Not him, about the seating chart, none of it was the behavior reserved for a girlfriend, or even a fiancé. "You didn't tell him," Amara said softly, and for the first time that night, her composure cracked, not from anger, but from something that looked dangerously close to grief. "You really don't know." "Know what?" Marcus's voice came out smaller than he intended. Jae-won answered before she could. "That my wife," he said, "built the very infrastructure fund your company has spent 18 months trying to secure. The $10 billion you're here for tonight, Mr. Webb, it doesn't move without her signature." Marcus felt the words land like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because nothing he could say would make sense of what he'd just heard. Amara. His Amara, the woman who used to clip coupons and cry over unpaid electric bills in their cramped 1-bedroom in College Park, controlled the fund that decided whether Webb Infrastructure Group lived or died. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "You worked at a call center." "I worked at a call center for 8 months after you left," Amara said, and there it was again, that flash of old pain beneath the polish. Then I went back to school. Then I went to work for a firm in Singapore that J1's company acquired 18 months later. You'd know that if you'd ever once asked how I was doing instead of assuming I disappeared. The crowd around them had begun to thin, guests suddenly finding urgent reasons to check their phones or refill their champagne, the particular choreography people perform when they sense a story unfolding that isn't theirs but that they desperately want to overhear anyway. J1 hadn't moved. He watched Marcus with the stillness of a man reading a balance sheet, cataloging every twitch of Marcus's face like it was data. You have a meeting with my legal team in. J1 glanced at his watch, unhurried. 38 minutes now, Mr. Webb. I'd suggest you use the time wisely. Though I confess I'm curious what you'll say. Most men don't discover they've insulted their own future in quite so public a fashion. I didn't know, Marcus said, and hated how much it sounded like begging. I swear to God I didn't know she was. That she was my wife. J1's voice dropped, just slightly. Just enough that Marcus felt the temperature of the conversation change. Or that she was the reason I agreed to consider your company at all. That stopped Marcus cold. What does that mean? Amara's eyes met his, and for one unguarded second, 4 years fell away and Marcus saw not the poised woman in an ivory gown but the 26-year-old who used to fall asleep next to him with textbooks still open on her chest, who used to whisper that someday she'd build something so big no one could ever look past her again. He had promised her back then that he'd help her get there. He remembered the promise now with the sour clarity of a man realizing, far too late, exactly what he'd thrown away. When your proposal crossed my desk 8 months ago, Amara said, I recognized the company name before I even opened the file. I told J1 everything, Marcus. Who you were. What happened between us. And I told him something else. Too, something I'm sure you're about to wish I hadn't. Marcus felt his stomach drop through the marble floor. Amara. I told him you were brilliant, she said, and the word landed like an accusation rather than a compliment. I told him that if anyone could deliver this project on time and under budget, it was you. I vouched for you, Marcus. I put my name behind yours before you ever walked into this room tonight, and confirmed every single doubt I had about whether that was a mistake. The photographer's shutter clicked again, somewhere in the periphery, capturing a moment Marcus was only beginning to understand would follow him long after tonight ended. He thought of his company's payroll, 340 employees who were counting on this deal closing. He thought of the bank notice sitting unopened in his hotel room, the one his CFO had begged him not to ignore. He thought of every calculated risk he'd taken to get to this ballroom tonight, and how none of it had prepared him for the risk currently standing in front of him in a soaked ivory gown, looking at him like a stranger. Let me fix this, he said quietly. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, J1 cut in, and for the first time his composure shifted not into anger, but into something colder, more deliberate. Mr. Webb, I built my career on reading people before they speak. And what I read tonight is a man who still doesn't understand what he's standing in the middle of. He turned slightly, offering his arm to Amara, who took it without hesitation though Marcus caught, just barely, the faint tremor in her hand as she did. I'll see you at the meeting, J1 said. Assuming you still intend to come. Though I should mention the terms of tonight's contract were never only about infrastructure margins and shipping lanes, Mr. Webb. There's a clause in that agreement with your name on it that I don't believe you've read closely enough. My legal team added it 8 months ago, on my wife's recommendation. Marcus's blood went cold. What clause? J1's smile didn't reach his eyes. You'll find out in 36 minutes, he said, and walked away with Amara at his side, leaving Marcus standing alone beneath the chandeliers, dripping with the same water he'd thrown, drowning in a truth he hadn't seen coming until it was already too late to swim away from it. Marcus didn't remember walking to the elevator. He didn't remember pressing the button for the 14th floor, where J1's legal team had reserved a private suite for tonight's signing. He only remembered standing in the mirrored elevator car, watching his own reflection-soaked shirt collar, wide eyes, a man who had walked into that ballroom certain he understood exactly what tonight would cost him, and who now understood nothing at all. 36 minutes. A clause with his name on it. Recommended by his ex-wife. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his CFO, Denise. 3 time zones away and unaware that the deal she'd bet the company's survival on had just detonated in a hotel ballroom. Everything on track. Board wants confirmation by midnight. Asterisk. He didn't answer. He couldn't, not yet. Not until he understood what he was walking into. The elevator doors opened onto a private hallway, and there she was, Amara, alone this time, standing outside the suite door like she'd been waiting for him specifically. Her ivory gown now dry but still faintly rumpled at the hem where water had soaked through earlier. "J1's inside with the lawyers," she said. "I asked for 5 minutes before you go in." "Why?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Haven't you humiliated me enough for one night?" Something in her face cracked, not from the accusation, but from the exhaustion underneath it. "I didn't do this to humiliate you, Marcus. I didn't even know you'd be here tonight until I saw your name on the guest list an hour before the gala started. Do you have any idea what it took for me to walk into that ballroom knowing you might be in it?" He said nothing. There was nothing to say. He'd spent 4 years telling himself a story where he was the wronged party, the one who worked himself half to death while his marriage quietly starved for attention, the one who came home from 20-hour days to an empty apartment and a note on the counter that simply said, "I can't do this anymore." He had never once, not in 4 years, considered what it had cost her to write that note. What it had cost her to walk away from a man she loved with nothing but 2 suitcases and a hope that starting over might hurt less than staying. "I built something, Marcus," she said quietly. "After everything, I built something real, and it terrified me every single day that it might not be enough, and I never once had you there to tell me it would be. So I stopped needing anyone to tell me that. I learned to tell myself." His throat tightened. "Amara, don't." She held up a hand, and for the first time her voice wavered. "Don't do the thing where you say my name like it fixes something. You don't get to walk in here tonight and undo 4 years with an apology you didn't even have the decency to give me in person when it mattered. If this story is stirring something in you right now, if you've ever loved someone and realized too late everything you failed to say, let us know in the comments below. Tell us where in this story you felt it hit hardest. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps more than you'd think, and it lets us know these are the stories worth telling. Amara took a breath, steadying herself, and when she spoke again her voice had shifted softer, but somehow heavier. "There's something you need to know before you walk into that room. Something J1 doesn't know I'm telling you." Marcus went still. "What?" "The clause in your contract," she said. "It isn't a trap. It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Her eyes searched his face for a long moment, like she was trying to decide, even now, whether he deserved the truth. 8 months ago, when your proposal crossed my desk, I had a choice. I could bury it, pretend I'd never seen your name, let some junior analyst reject it on paper without ever mentioning I knew you. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have questioned it. Why didn't you? "Because despite everything," she said, and her voice broke just barely on the last word, "I still believed you were good at what you do. I still believed the thing I fell in love with about you in the first place, before the hours, before the silence, before all of it was real. So I fought for this deal to reach you. And I attached one condition to it. One that J1 agreed to, though he doesn't know the personal reason behind it." Marcus felt his pulse hammering in his throat. What condition? Behind her, the suite door opened, and J1's voice cut smoothly into the hallway. "Mr. Webb, we're ready for you." Amara's eyes held Marcus's for one last second, filled with something between warning and grief. "The condition," she said quietly, "is that if you sign this contract tonight, you'll be working directly under my authority for the next 3 years. Every decision, every dollar, you'll answer to me, Marcus. And I need to know right now before you walk through that door whether you can actually survive that, or whether this deal is about to destroy us both a second time." Marcus stood frozen in that hallway, the weight of what she'd just told him settling slower than it should have, like ice cracking beneath his feet, one fracture at a time. Working under her authority, answering to her for every decision for 3 years. He had spent 4 years building a life around the story that Amara was the one who left, the one who couldn't handle the pressure of what he was building. And now here she was, standing in a hallway in a hotel he couldn't afford before tonight, telling him that his company's survival depended entirely on his ability to answer to the woman he'd once failed. "Why would you do that to yourself?" he asked. "Why would you want that?" "I don't," Amara said flatly. "I fought against including it, actually. Jaewon's the one who insisted. That stopped him." "Why?" "Because he doesn't do business with people he can't read," she said. "And in 8 months of reviewing your work, your instincts, the way you handled the Manila project when it nearly collapsed, he decided he wanted more oversight on this deal than usual. He doesn't know you're my ex-husband caused this particular condition. He thinks it's simply prudent business. I let him believe that, because the alternative was explaining something I wasn't ready to explain to my own husband on a random Tuesday in March." Marcus absorbed that, and something colder slid beneath his ribs. "So he doesn't know about us?" "Not until tonight." "No," she said. "He didn't know until you threw a glass of water at his wife in front of 300 people at the most important gala of the fiscal year." The suite door remained open behind her, spilling warm light and low voices into the hallway, and Marcus understood that whatever conversation was about to happen inside that room, it would not simply be about $10 billion anymore. It would be about a marriage Jaewon had built on trust, and a secret Amara had kept buried for 8 months, and a man standing in a hallway who had just detonated that secret in the worst possible way imaginable. "Amara." His voice came out low, urgent. "Does he know why I threw the water? Does he know I saw you and thought that I'd moved on and become someone else's trophy?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes, Marcus. He heard everything you said before the water even left your hand. He heard you call me a name I won't repeat, in front of half the executives on the Eastern Seaboard. So no, this isn't just business anymore, and no, I can't protect you from what happens next. I can only tell you the truth before you walk in there, because despite everything, I don't want to watch you lose everything you've worked for over one moment of rage you can't take back." Marcus felt something in his chest, some last defensive wall, finally give way. "I thought you'd left me for money," he said quietly, and the confession tasted like ash. 4 years, and I told myself that story every single day because it hurt less than the truth that I drove you away by disappearing into my own ambition and forgetting you were standing right next to me the whole time." Amara's composure cracked fully then, just for a moment, tears rising and refusing to fall. "It wasn't the money, Marcus. It was never the money. It was waking up every day next to a man who looked at me like I was a problem to be managed instead of a person he chose. Jaewon has never once made me feel that way. Not once. And I built everything I have now on the promise that I'd never let myself feel small again." Jaewon appeared in the doorway then, his expression unreadable, his eyes moving between Amara and Marcus with a particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the wife standing in front of him. "Amara." His voice was quiet, controlled, but something underneath it had shifted a coldness that hadn't been there in the ballroom. "A word. Now." She glanced at Marcus one last time. "Go inside. Sign nothing until I come back." But as she turned to follow her husband into the suite, Marcus caught the flicker of fear crossing her face, not fear of Jaewon's anger, but something deeper, something that told Marcus this conversation happening behind that closed door in the next few minutes might unravel far more than tonight's contract. It might unravel the only thing Amara had built to protect herself since the day she walked out of his life 4 years ago. And Marcus, dripping and desperate and finally understanding what he'd destroyed, realized he had 30 minutes to decide whether he was about to watch her lose everything twice, once because of him, and once because of a lie of omission neither of them had ever meant to tell. The door didn't fully close behind them, and Marcus, against every instinct telling him to walk into that suite and face the lawyers waiting for him, found himself standing frozen at the gap, unable to stop himself from listening. "You never told me," Jaewon said, his voice low, controlled in a way that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. 8 months, Amara. 8 months of dinners with this company's board. 8 months of me asking your opinion on every clause, every risk assessment, And you never once mentioned the man whose contract you were championing was your husband. Ex-husband, Amara said. And I told you why I couldn't say it. Because the moment I said his name, you'd have pulled the deal on principle, and 340 people who had nothing to do with my marriage would have lost their jobs over something that happened to me 4 years before I ever met you. That's not the only reason, and you know it. Something in J1's voice cracked, just slightly, the first genuine fracture Marcus had heard in it all night. You didn't tell me because some part of you wasn't finished with him yet. That's not fair. Isn't it? Pause heavy with things unsaid. I watched your face tonight, Amara. When he threw that water. You didn't look afraid. You didn't look angry. You looked like you'd been waiting 4 years for him to finally see you standing in a room he couldn't afford to walk into. Tell me that's not true. Silence stretched long enough that Marcus's heart pounded against his ribs, waiting. I built an entire life to prove to myself I didn't need him to see me, Amara finally said, quieter now. That doesn't mean some wound doesn't ache when the person who caused it finally realizes what he lost. That's not the same as still loving him, Jun. That's just what it means to be human. Something shifted in the room's tension, not resolution, but a fragile kind of understanding beginning to form. There's something else, J1 said, and his tone had changed again, colder now, more deliberate. Something I haven't told you. About why I really pushed for that oversight clause. Marcus, still hovering at the door, felt his pulse spike. I had my team investigate web infrastructure groups 6 months ago, J1 continued. Not because of you. Before I knew any connection existed between you and him. I had them investigate because of irregularities in the Manila project financials numbers that didn't reconcile the way they should have. Amara's voice sharpened. What kind of irregularities? The kind that suggests someone inside his company has been quietly diverting funds through a shell subsidiary for the better part of 2 years, J1 said. I wanted oversight on this contract not simply as prudent business, Amara. I wanted a controlling position because I suspected, and my analysts now believe that if this deal closes without proper safeguards, Web Infrastructure Group's own board may be walking directly into a fraud they don't yet know exists. If your stomach just dropped the way ours did writing this, that's exactly where we need you to be right now. Comment below what you think Marcus is about to walk into. And if you're invested in finding out whether he's innocent or complicit, make sure you're subscribed, because the next few minutes change everything. Marcus's hand found the doorframe, gripping it as the floor seemed to tilt beneath him a second time that night. Fraud. A shell subsidiary. Someone inside his own company. He thought immediately of Denise, his CFO, the woman who had built the company's financial infrastructure alongside him for a decade, who had texted him not 20 minutes ago asking for confirmation the deal was on track. He thought of the late nights she'd insisted on handling certain wire transfers personally, the time she'd waved off his questions about vendor payments with a tired smile and asterisk, don't worry about the details, just close the deal. His stomach turned to ice. Inside the suite, Amara's voice had dropped to something almost dangerous. You're telling me you knew about potential fraud in his company for 6 months, and the first time I'm hearing about it is tonight 30 minutes before he's supposed to sign a $10 billion contract? I'm telling you now because you deserve to know before he walks through that door and signs papers that could implicate him in something he may have no idea is happening under his own roof, J1 said. Whatever complicated history the two of you share, Amara, I need you to separate it from what's about to happen in that room. Because if what my analysts found is accurate, in the next 30 minutes, that man is either going to discover the biggest betrayal of his career, or he already knows about it and he's about to sign his name to cover it up. Marcus stepped back from the door, his hands trembling. His mind racing through a decade of trust he'd placed in one person, replaying every strange half-answer, every late night, every time Denise had told him not to worry about numbers that were, apparently, never adding up the way they should have. The suite door opened fully then, and J1 stood in the frame. His dark eyes locking onto Marcus with an intensity that made the earlier chill in the ballroom feel like nothing at all. Mr. Webb, he said, I think it's time you saw exactly what you've been signing your name to for the last 2 years. The suite was smaller than Marcus expected, no boardroom theatrics. Just a long table, 3 lawyers in dark suits who rose briefly and sat back down, and a single laptop open at the head of the table, its screen angled toward the chair Marcus was clearly meant to take. He didn't sit. "Show me." J1 nodded to one of the lawyers, a sharp-eyed woman who turned the laptop fully toward him. Rows of numbers filled the screen. Wire transfers, dates, account numbers routed through a subsidiary Marcus had never once heard of. Meridian Coastal Holdings. He scanned the timestamps. 2 years of transfers, small enough individually to avoid triggering automatic audit flags, but totaling, when Marcus did the math in his head, just under $40 million. "This is impossible," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, memory fragments were assembling themselves into a shape he didn't want to see. Denise's insistence on personally handling vendor relationships for the Manila project. The late nights she claimed were about cleaning up documentation. The time she'd talked him out of hiring an outside auditor last year, telling him it would send the wrong signal to investors during a sensitive negotiation period. "Who is Denise Ferrer to you?" J1 asked, and the question landed like a blade because he already knew the answer before Marcus said it. "My CFO," Marcus said. "She's been with the company since the beginning." Since before, he stopped himself, but Amara, standing quietly near the window, finished the thought for him. "Since before me," she said softly. "I remember her, Marcus. She used to make you cancel our dinners. She used to call your cell phone at 11 at night, and you'd leave the apartment without explaining where you were going." The room went very still. "You're saying this like it's an accusation," Marcus said, though his voice had lost its conviction. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Amara said. "I'm telling you what I remember. Because I think you need to ask yourself right now, in front of these people, whether you've ever really looked at what she's been doing behind your trust for the last 10 years, or whether you've simply been too busy building the company to notice the person quietly hollowing it out from the inside." Marcus stared at the screen, at $40 million bleeding out of his company in increments too small to notice individually and too large, cumulatively, to ever explain away. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, another text from Denise. This one more urgent. "The board is asking. Please confirm signing is proceeding as planned. Time sensitive." He turned the phone so J1 could see it. J1's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened with interest. "She's pressing you to close quickly." "She's always pressed me to close quickly," Marcus said, and the realization landed with sickening clarity. "Every deal. Every negotiation. She's the one who insisted we couldn't afford outside due diligence on any contract over a certain size, because it would slow us down and spook investors. I never questioned it because she'd been right about everything else for a decade. $10 billion is a large number to move through an account before anyone thinks to ask hard questions," J1 said quietly. "If this deal closes tonight, without proper oversight, whoever has been diverting funds from your company for 2 years would suddenly have access to a payment structure 10 times larger than anything they've touched before. And they'd have a very narrow window to disappear before anyone noticed." Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You think she's planning to use this deal to cover her tracks? Or worse, to disappear with a piece of it?" "I think," J1 said, "that the clause requiring my wife's direct oversight for the next 3 years isn't just prudent business anymore, Mr. Webb. It's the only thing standing between your company surviving this and your company becoming a headline about the collapse of Webb Infrastructure Group, and possibly, depending on what my forensic accountants find in the next 72 hours, the collapse of your freedom along with it." The weight of that landed on Marcus like the ballroom ceiling had finally, actually caved in. 10 years of trust. A decade of believing Denise Ferrer had been building something alongside him, when she may have been quietly emptying it from underneath. And somewhere 300 miles away, she was sitting by her phone, waiting for a signature that would either save her secret or expose it completely. His phone buzzed a third time. This text was different. *Marcus, I need you to sign tonight. Don't let anyone delay it. Trust me on this one like you always have. *. He looked up slowly, meeting Amara's eyes across the room, and for the first time all night, they weren't looking at each other as ex-husband and ex-wife or rivals, or strangers reunited by cruel coincidence. They were looking at each other as two people who had just realized in the same instant that the biggest threat of the evening wasn't standing in this room at all. "If I don't sign tonight," Marcus said slowly, "she'll know something's wrong. And whatever she's planning, she'll accelerate it." "And if you do sign," J1 said, "with the oversight clause intact, she loses her window entirely, and will have full visibility into every transaction she makes from this point forward." Marcus looked down at the contract sitting on the table, at the page marked with a small yellow tab where his signature was expected, and understood with sudden terrible clarity that the decision in front of him was no longer about pride, or a $10 billion deal, or even the woman he'd wronged 4 years ago standing across the room. It was about whether he had the courage, in the next 5 minutes, to sign away his own authority to protect the company and the people he'd spent his entire adult life building, from a betrayal he'd never seen coming from the person he trusted most. Marcus picked up the pen, but before his hand touched paper, he looked at Amara one last time. "If I sign this and you're right about her, she'll fight this in every court she can find. She's smart, Amara. She built half of our compliance framework herself. She knows exactly how to hide behind good paperwork. Then we make sure the paperwork works against her instead," Amara said, moving to the table for the first time all night, standing beside him rather than across from him. "J1's forensic team doesn't need a confession. They need 48 hours of visibility into every account Meridian Coastal Holdings touches once new capital starts flowing through it. If she moves money the moment this deal closes, she hands us the evidence herself. And if she doesn't move anything, if she's more careful than that, then we watch," J1 said simply. "And we wait. Guilty people rarely have the patience to wait as long as innocent ones do." Marcus's phone buzzed a 4th time, and this text made his blood run cold in an entirely different way. "Asterisk if you don't sign in the next 10 minutes. I'm telling the board you got cold feet and cost us the deal. Don't do this to everyone who depends on you, Marcus. Sign it, asterisk." He read it twice, feeling something in him harden. 10 years of trusting her instincts, and now he could see, laid bare, exactly how she operated urgency as a weapon, loyalty as leverage. The same tactic she'd used to keep him from asking questions for a decade now aimed squarely at closing her own trap before anyone noticed the door. "She's not just protecting a secret anymore," Marcus said slowly. "She's protecting a timeline. Something's forcing her hand tonight specifically." J1's sharp-eyed lawyer spoke for the first time. "Mr. On, if I may, the shell account Meridian Coastal Holdings has a wire scheduled for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Eastern. 41 million outbound, to an account in Zurich we haven't been able to trace ownership on yet." The room went silent. "She's leaving," Amara said quietly. "Tomorrow morning. Whether this deal closes or not." "Then we don't need to wait 48 hours, Marcus said, and for the first time that night, something steadied in his voice, not the arrogance that had carried him into that ballroom 2 hours earlier, but something quieter, harder one. "We need to freeze that transfer before 6 a.m., and we need her to believe, until the very last second, that everything is going exactly according to her plan." J1 studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his dark eyes, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something that looked almost like respect. "That would require you to call her in the next 10 minutes and tell her the deal is signed. While it very much is not. I know. It would also require you to sound convincing," Amara added, "which, given the last time you spoke to me tonight involved a glass of water, is not something I'd currently bet on." Despite everything, despite the wreckage of the last 2 hours, something almost like a laugh escaped Marcus short, exhausted, disbelieving. "Then I guess I have 10 minutes to figure out how to lie better than I've ever lied in my life. To save a company I almost let someone burn down without even noticing the match. If you've made it this far, we need you with us for what happens in the next few minutes, because everything Marcus has built, everyone who works for him, and possibly his own freedom now comes down to a single phone call. Subscribe now if stories like this keep you holding your breath until the very last line, because what's coming next is the moment this entire story has been building toward." J1 slid the contract 2 inches closer to Marcus. "Sign it. Properly this time, with full understanding of what you're agreeing to. 3 years of oversight. My wife's authority over every financial decision your company makes. Not because I don't trust you, Mr. Webb, but because I trust exactly no one blindly anymore, including myself, when it comes to protecting people I care about. Marcus looked once more at Amara, who nodded, not the nod of an ex-wife extending forgiveness, but something more complicated, more honest. The nod of someone choosing, deliberately, to believe a person could still change. He signed his name. Then he picked up his phone, took a breath that felt like the only steady thing left in the entire hotel, and dialed the number of the woman who had spent 10 years building his trust so carefully, so patiently, that she'd nearly gotten away with dismantling everything he loved from the inside without him ever once looking up to notice the walls were already hollow. Denise. Marcus kept his voice level, forcing warmth into it that he didn't feel anymore. It's done. Signed 20 minutes ago. There was a pause on the line, too long, just slightly too long, before her voice came back, bright with relief that sounded, now that Marcus was listening for it, almost rehearsed. Thank God. I told the board you'd come through. I knew you would. You always do, Marcus said, and the words tasted like the first true thing he'd said to her in years, though not in the way she'd understand. Listen, before you sleep, there's a wire scheduled for 6 a.m. through Meridian Coastal. I need you to hold it. New compliance requirement from ON's legal team. Standard oversight clause, nothing to worry about, but everything routes through their forensic review for the next 72 hours starting tonight. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. Marcus counted every one of them with his heart in his throat. That's unusual, Denise said carefully. For a routine vendor payment. Everything's unusual tonight, Marcus said. $10 billion tends to come with strings. Across the room, J1's lawyer was already typing rapidly into a laptop, a live freeze order queued and ready the instant Marcus ended the call. Amara stood beside Marcus, close enough that he could feel her holding her breath the same way he was. Marcus, Denise said, and something in her tone shifted lighter, faster, the practiced ease of a woman recalculating in real time. I trust you handled everything properly tonight. Nothing unexpected happened at the gala, did it? His pulse spiked. She knew. Or suspected. Maybe she'd already seen a photo circulating the water, the scandal. His face splashed across someone's society feed within the hour. Nothing I couldn't handle, he said. I'll call you in the morning. He ended the call before she could respond, and for a moment the suite was utterly silent except for the soft clicking of the lawyer's keyboard. Wires frozen, she said finally, looking up. Account access suspended pending forensic review. If she tries to move anything before 6 a.m., it'll bounce and it'll flag. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Marcus sat down, not because anyone told him to, but because his legs had simply stopped holding the weight of everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She'll know by morning, he said quietly. She'll run. She won't get far, J1 said. Guilt makes people reckless in ways patience never does. He was right. By sunrise, Denise Ferrer would attempt to access 3 separate accounts, trigger 4 separate alerts, and be intercepted at Hartsfield-Jackson before her flight to Zurich ever left the gate. But that story belonged to another morning, another set of headlines, another chapter of consequences Marcus would spend the next year untangling in courtrooms and compliance meetings. What mattered, in this quiet suite at 11:30, wasn't the ending of her story. It was the beginning of something Marcus hadn't expected to find in this hotel at all. He looked at Amara, still standing there in her rumpled ivory gown, and found himself saying the only true thing he had left. I threw water at you tonight because I couldn't stand seeing you happy without me. That's not something I'm proud of. But watching you tonight, watching how you handled all of this, how you built a life strong enough to survive a man like me walking back into it, I understand now what I lost wasn't a wife who left too easily. It was a woman I never once gave the chance to become everything she already was. Amara didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, something unreadable passing behind her eyes, not forgiveness, not quite, but something gentler than the anger she'd carried into that ballroom. You don't get to have me back, Marcus, she said finally. That part of my life is over, and it's over for good reason. But you do get a second chance to be a man worth respecting if you choose to take it. 3 years of my oversight will make sure of that, whether you like it or not. It was J1 who broke the tension, stepping forward and extending his hand not out of warmth, but out of the particular respect one careful man extends another once the dust has settled. Mr. Webb, welcome to a partnership you didn't expect, and one you'll need to earn every single day for the next 3 years. Marcus shook it. If there's one thing this story should leave you with tonight, it's this. The people we hurt without realizing it often become the very people strong enough to save us later, if we're humble enough to let them. Before you go, tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking from Marcus and Amara's story tonight. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story that reminds you it's never too late to become someone worth forgiving. Somewhere above Atlanta, dawn was still hours away, but for the first time in 4 years, Marcus Webb walked out of that hotel suite understanding that some doors don't close to punish you, they close so you can finally see, clearly, everything you were too afraid to look at while they were still open.